So I've been asked to talk a bit about mentorship, but also general capacity development, and they are very much linked. But there are some details in different parts of it that you probably need to hear together. Just thinking a little bit initially about what do we mean by mentorship, and it was great to hear Owen and to hear Owen's honesty, to be frank, around what mentoring perhaps has done for him. And some of that, I'm not sure whether I've got this right or no, is probably because, Owen, you need a bit more mentorship now for people to actually say, yes, you're going in the right direction. This is how you'll know if this is working or not working. And when we think about mentoring, we think about a number of different things, don't we? And people can get very hung up on what's the difference between mentoring and coaching, and we'll come to that in just a moment as well. But sometimes mentoring takes the form of actually teaching somebody something. You know, this is actually how you do this. This is what this bit of the form needs to look like. It's often about motivating, but motivating in the right kind of way. Unrealistic motivating doesn't help anybody, to be frank. It's often about providing information, helping people to work out what their goals are. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? How are you going to get there? It can either be one-to-one, it can be group, and so on and so forth. Inspiring is a key word that you often hear about mentoring, and a good mentor is somebody who does inspire you. And so, as I've said, sometimes there's this division between, you know, what's mentoring, what's coaching, how directive is it, and so on and so forth. And I would just say, actually, it depends on what you need at that particular time. And so I would caution people to move away from trying to categorize things as one or the other. But if you think about what a coach does to a sports team, then they're trying to achieve a very specific goal. So I would say in the mentorship that I do with people, sometimes it is very much coaching, because you've got to get them to a particular point where they're ready to press the button, submit the application. They've got everything lined up and they've been coached well enough to be able to go for it and to attend the interview and to get through. So there's a number of things in there, but I'm actually just going to talk a little bit about, I guess, how I've been mentored, because we do learn from our own experiences, don't we? And I would say a lot of the mentoring I've received has actually been unconscious. People haven't been realizing that they've been mentoring me, and with that particular title. And I'm sure most of you in the room can think of times when people have really guided you in a direction without even realizing it. Sometimes there've been ongoing relationships, and sometimes it's just a one-off meeting that I've had with somebody who really helps me to get to the bottom of a particular problem and helps me to understand the landscape a bit better, so I can write a particular section of a bid more successfully, and so on. But also there are those different types. Quite often it has been for very specific advice or guidance, and sometimes I've driven that mentorship and asked for help, which is really important to do. I ask for help now at my stage. You know, we all need help with some things, and we run these monthly drop-in sessions for the nursing and midwifery office, and I refer to that as my reverse mentoring. That's where I get to learn from people out there doing the job, actually, what things do I need to feed into other meetings. But it's often been offered by others as well, that's been unsolicited. So in other words, I haven't had to go and find somebody. They've actually come to find me and said, oh, well, you know, would you like some help with this? Or I can tell you about X or Y. In terms of the mentors themselves, what's been important about those mentors, quite often it's been about somebody who's had first-hand experience. So specific, if I'm applying to a particular grant funding scheme, then I've had some mentorship from somebody who's already had a grant, either just from that funder or from that particular scheme. But sometimes it's just a lot more general about, well, what are the general rules about grantsmanship? How do you actually put something like that together? And I would say a really important part of being a mentor that I've found is that acceptance of my path. You know, the fact that I may be doing things in a slightly different way, that I've come into my journey in a different way. I've heard people give amazing talks about, you know, they got a first in their undergrad degree, and then they did a master's, and then they did a PhD. Well, probably because of my age, I started a PhD with no other academic qualifications, just with simply my registered nurse qualification, and that was enough for the university to think, actually, there's something here, let's actually go with this. I did a couple of other things then along the way, did a master's at some point during my PhD, which was a slightly odd thing to do, but I still to this day don't have a first degree, and it's not held me back. But that acceptance that I am where I am and I'm going to do what I want to do, and you're not going to actually send me back to the beginning of the snakes and ladders, if you like, and make me actually start a first degree. No one ever suggested that to me, so I was very fortunate. And I guess also they've often not been constrained by rules or conventions that, well, actually now it's 5 minutes before our time, so let's summarize this. So that whole sense of sort of going with the flow. And I would say that what the good mentors have done is they've actually found out about me first, you know, in order to provide the appropriate mentorship. What have I done? What things actually get me out of bed in the mornings, if you like? What things make me smile, really will motivate me? What things inspire me? And so on and so forth. So those things have been really important to me, and they may help you when you're looking for a mentor as well. I would say I haven't had one mentor. I've had various people who've provided mentorship at different stages of the journey. And I suppose it's worth also thinking about how I actually developed as a mentor. And I would say I'm definitely a work in progress, an unfinished object, as they say. I think you never stop learning if you're taking mentorship seriously. You learn things from every encounter you have with somebody, the things where you go, oh, actually, maybe that didn't go quite so well, or oh, that person doesn't want to speak to me again. And that's fine too, because being able to close off a mentor relationship is really important. But also learning from my own mentoring experiences and then being willing to feed that forward, a bit like Owen was talking about all the peer reviewing for journals. And it's a huge amount of work, isn't it? But peer review is such an important part of actually how we all develop. So that feeding forward is really important. And I guess as a mentor, I quite often, one of the first things I will ask people is actually, how do you sell yourself? Quite difficult for us, isn't it, as people in the UK, because we don't sell ourselves at all, really. We tend to be a bit more humble than that. But if you've got that elevator pitch, what would you actually say to somebody that would make them think, oh, actually, you've got something, I like that idea, but I also think that you might be the right person to take that idea forward. But also understanding what the constraints and the expectations might be for that person as well. So in other words, you know, I always want to know about a little bit about sort of family situations and those sorts of things, actually what and some of that just purely relates to when we can have meetings and not expecting people to turn up for a meeting at a time that actually doesn't suit them. So just finding out a little bit more about the other person and what they expect to get out of this. If you make unrealistic expectations, you know, if you tell your mentee that they're likely to achieve X by 2 years' time, then obviously if that doesn't happen, it's incredibly demotivating. And, you know, telling somebody, oh, well, this is a grant scheme that it's easy to get money out of, then if somebody doesn't get it, that's actually not going to help anybody, is it? So thinking about actually the sorts of things I will suggest to people, but also if very specific coaching about a particular part of, for example, a grant application, a fellowship application, I will signpost to others. So sometimes if somebody's wanting to develop a particular intervention, or they want a bit more insight into complex intervention, I will actually signpost them to somebody else, do an introductory email and say, would you mind just giving this person half an hour, because it'll be much more productive than half an hour from me. And also sort of allowing the people that you're mentoring to sort of see behind what's in front of them, if you like, and actually how have I got from A to B? What have my workarounds been? How have I made myself more visible? And those sorts of things. I think that is really, really helpful. So mentorship is a really important, very sort of special relationship, I would say. Even if it's just half an hour from somebody, that's actually really precious. But I think it's also important for us to think about capacity development as well, because that's what I've been asked to cover as well. We'll come back to mentorship in just a moment, but thinking particularly about the NIHR right now and what the NIHR provides for people. The NIHR actually supports people, it supports studies, it supports sites, provides incredible infrastructure, but then also helps with the spread of the research findings and so on and so forth. And in order to do that, NIHR also needs pipelines. It needs pipelines of studies, so things that are in development. So thinking about actually what's going to be the next thing that comes through in this program of work, but also pipelines of people, which is why things like the ICA pathway have started with internships and then moving into pre-doctoral, doctoral and postdoctoral fellowships, so that actually people are on a pathway, not necessarily a pathway that you have to follow strictly, but that whole sense that you've got to have a pipeline of people ready to go into the next stage. And that's really important. And also a pipeline of sites. So just thinking about what does this really mean? And I always think that this kind of description of what the NIHR does is much more helpful than showing you what the structures are within NIHR. Because if you look at it in this kind of way, then for your own development, you may be looking for some kind of a personal award, or you may decide that actually I've had quite a few personal awards now, or I've had a really big personal award. I'm going to move now into a study, and what kind of study do I want to develop? So in terms of personal awards, there are a number of different ways of looking at this, and both the clinical academic, all the work that the academy does, and the senior investigator research professors, but also the senior research leader program, which essentially gives you 2 days a week for 3 years to develop when you're already in a research leadership position. And we've just started the second cohort of this program, no longer called 70 at 70, because we're not celebrating 70 years of the NHS anymore. But those people have come from a variety of backgrounds, from research delivery, from management, from clinical academics, a whole lot of different folks. So that opportunity is open to lots of people. And then there's also that whole sort of idea of credentialing, what we're providing through the CRNCC for clinician researchers, the incubators and how they might help, but also the various schemes for developing skills as a principal investigator, wherever you're coming from. And at the moment, we're looking particularly for career opportunities at targeting undergraduate students, as the academy are as well. And we're sort of got a bit of a pincer movement. We're coming from different angles on that, which hopefully means we'll be even more successful. In terms of the studies, I'm sure a lot of you in the room are aware of the current call from the Research for Patient Benefit programme. There's an AHP call. I'm not sure whether it's out yet, but it's about to be out if it's not out yet. And actually thinking about what those studies need to look like, very much now they need to be mapped to need. If there's no sort of deficit, if you like, then why do we need research? So thinking about those kinds of things. Sometimes it's important to really think about different sites, particularly for underserved areas of our sort of populations. How do we actually start undertaking research in different places? There's a whole lot of infrastructure. I think probably NIHR hold the cup for the largest number of acronyms, and we even use the same acronym for 2 different things sometimes. But there are lots of different parts of NIHR infrastructure that can help with all of this, whether you're thinking about a personal award or thinking about developing a research study. So getting to know actually what your local offer is and how you can tap into people, but also then thinking about how evidence gets back into practice, because that's success, isn't it? And that's the only way that health outcomes will change at all, is if practice changes. And I think sometimes as researchers, speaking as a CI on studies as well, sometimes we forget to go back to that bit we wrote in that says this is why we need this research and this is the potential significance of this work. And then we don't necessarily always go back to that and go, oh, well, have we realized that? Have we actually now spread that appropriately? So for both people being mentored and for the mentors themselves, when you think about these maps, this map of particularly for what NIHR offers, but in a way you can apply this map to whatever part of your career you're in. Which bit of this are you interested in getting engaged with? It's important to actually know this map, know what the opportunities are on here. And it's important too that you develop a track record that's relevant for whatever it is you're applying for. So look at the criteria really carefully. And it may be that you want to apply to be a senior research leader, not in the next cohort, but the one after that. So there's some work that you will do in that intervening time. Thinking about your PDR, the key change between appraisal and PDR is this is about development. This is about what you do going forward, not about how well or badly you did in the previous year. So this is your chance to really take the bull by the horns, if you like. And so the work that's being done by, for example, NHS England through the matron and service managers toolkit for research should eventually help those PDR type discussions, because you're more likely to be talking to somebody who's able to access a toolkit that says, actually, this is how you have a conversation about research with the people you're doing PDR for. So you should find some more of that mentorship feeding in perhaps places you hadn't found it before. Get yourself a mentor, find out who the local champions are, and see whether the work that you're wanting to do really feeds in with the work they're trying to champion, and also linking in with sort of QI audit work that's already underway. And Owen mentioned NCPOD, and the recommendations that come out of NCPOD reports are really helpful in terms of providing a motivator for what you want to do, either for a personal award or for a research study. But one of the key things I think that's often missing is what we do for people post-award. And I guess I'm talking here more to mentors than mentees. And we need to be thinking, before somebody finishes an award or comes to the end of a study, actually, what skills, experience and insights have they gained during that time? How do we actually really get to grips with that? Just sit down and have a conversation and find out what's come through that particular opportunity. And then how do you build that forward? And do this before you ever get to the end. So somebody who's coming back into your team, having done a PCAF, a pre-doctoral fellowship, actually, at what time do they want to apply for the PhD itself? And how can you use what's happened during that PCAF to improve things that are happening in your own area? And again, going back to what was the motivator to get the grant in the first place. So those things are really important. And I guess as mentors, really valuing the personal investment that people have put in to these opportunities, because actually it's huge. And if we're not careful, we can really demotivate people that we're mentoring simply by not appreciating that they've put areas of their life on hold to do a particular thing. And I'm sure Owen would attest to this in relation to his doctoral fellowship, that actually there are other things that you could have been doing, but you're not doing because you've got such a focus on actually getting this work done and getting through that. So those are, in a way, that brings together the capacity development with mentorship and making mentorship real for people. And I think as mentees, this figure might also help you to think about, well, what can I ask for help with? And if somebody wants a conversation with you when you're coming to the end of something, then think about what skills have you gained? What experience have you had? What insights do you now have? If you've been involved in something more at national level, how can that be brought back? And perhaps being ready to have that conversation. It might be sort of perhaps couched as an informal chat, but you can go with a very clear agenda. This is what I want to tell you, and this is how I think we can use this in this particular setting.